I've quoted something that Stravinsky said about inspiration. On page 147, he talks about how creating something needs imagination. He's talking about creativity here, about making any art is definitely a creative process. It needs imagination, but it's not the same as just imagining, because being creative involves stumbling onto something lucky and inevitably reaching that discovery eventually. Basically, what he's saying is that getting into that inspired state isn't something you can plan, it just sort of happens, and it feels like good luck. But in the end, this lucky discovery is actually something that was bound to happen no matter what. So, it's got two sides to it. On one hand, it's a lucky find, and creativity involves that. If not, it wouldn't be art, it would just be craft and skill. But at the same time, we've got to realize that this lucky find was always going to happen, and it was bound to be discovered eventually. We should not mix up this kind of luck with the unpredictable daydreams we might call fantasies. I think experienced, true artists will get that difference, unless they're not really a qualified and fully grown artist. They'd see inspiration as just a random lucky find, something they came across through their own smarts and ability. The kind of unpredictable imagination and daydreaming we're talking about here isn't what we mean by inspiration. Daydreaming is like willingly getting lost in random thoughts, while the help from some unexpected discovery we mentioned earlier is a whole different thing. This help from an unexpected discovery is what puts us in that inspired state for our work. It's not just random daydreaming, so now we probably understand what inspiration really means, right? Actually, in any creative activity, not just art, the final result always involves that inspired state, even when it comes to doing something that seems boring, like writing academic papers. If this theoretical paper is really groundbreaking and creative, it can't just be something the author already knew beforehand. They have to dive deep into their own theoretical thinking, face all kinds of challenges, and hit a wall before suddenly everything starts to make sense. If an academic paper goes through this kind of inspired writing process, it's bound to be creative. So, we shouldn't think that our thoughts in our heads are good enough. Learning theory should also involve the act of creation, which means writing. We shouldn't separate thinking from making. True thoughts come to life through writing, and writing definitely needs an inspired state, which requires us to be mentally and physically ready. Just like Husserl said, when he was doing phenomenology, he had to be full of energy, have a clear mind, and be completely focused to write his phenomenology of time. After a long session into his writing, he reached a point where he couldn't understand what he had written. That's because he was exhausted. Later, he couldn't even understand the words he had written before, the ones he wrote himself. It's clear that in the world of creating philosophy, when you reach the most difficult level, you can't just write after thinking things through. You have to start writing first. All truly original thoughts come to life in the act of creation. Just like I said, what does thinking even mean? It means making. Sure, when it comes to making art, being creative and original is a big deal. I mean, that's the first thing that pops into your head when you think about art, right? And it makes sense. You can't really create art without being innovative. Artists shouldn't be stuck doing the same thing over and over again, or copying other people. So, yeah, every piece of art has got to have that spark of innovation, no doubt about it. But, when we talk about being innovative, we tend to see it as the opposite of tradition. We see tradition as being kinda old-fashioned and conservative. Let's talk about that creative urge we've been going on about. The thing that sets apart regular folks from artists, as we've mentioned before, is this very urge. See, we all have the urge to express ourselves, but for an artist, what else does this urge become? A creative impulse. Now, why does it become a creative impulse as well? Well, it's because the artist has been steeped in the art world for a good while, and has undergone a ton of training and learning. This whole learning process has given the artist a special power. So, when the urge to express themselves kicks in, they become something else too. They become like a fortune teller, but for art, seeing the aesthetic future of their work, a foresight that we don't have, but they do. Where does he get that feeling about what kind of artistic future he can create? It comes from all the learning he's done about art. For any artist, their growth and training mean that they're diving into a specific artistic style or tradition. Every artist starts by learning from what other artists have done before, and as they grow and develop, they not only pick up those artistic techniques, but they also grasp how those techniques are tied to real-life experiences. So, what we're really talking about is this third skill of an artist, right? It's about the connection between skill and life experience, and how that leads to embracing a particular artistic tradition. Let's say you're into painting. You're always going to pick up your skills from a certain way of doing things in the art world. You can't say you're starting from scratch, right? So, let's look at the big picture. If you're a Chinese painter, it's a given that you've learned your stuff in the Chinese painting scene over in China. I guess you're not into oil painting, but if you're more into Western-style oil painting, then for sure you've been trained in the ways of Western painting. So, how artists grow and develop is all part of a particular way of doing things in the art world. When we talk about artistic development, what we're really talking about is diving into a specific artistic tradition. So, let's lay it out like this. What's an artistic tradition? Well, it's basically the historical way that an artwork's got its vibe. It's not about one person, but about the traditions of a whole nation's art scene. For example, growing up and learning the art of Chinese painting means we're part of the tradition. So, every piece of Chinese painting, like ink wash or landscape, has its vibe all set up and shaped by history. That's what we call an artistic tradition. The vibe of Chinese painting has its own flavor, different from Western painting. So, tradition kind of sets the stage for how artists do their thing, and it sets the expectations of people looking at art. That's what an artistic tradition is all about. Artistic tradition guides artists and also shapes what people expect from artworks. It's like our guiding principle, and we need to really understand how it's different from just doing things out of habit. So, what's tradition? I mean, sure, it's something from way back when, but it's more than that, right? It's the stuff from the past that still matters today. Not everything from the past is tradition. Only the things from the past that still matter now, they're the real traditions. This idea of the past being relevant today is a big deal, not just in art but in life, you know? Like us Chinese folks, we know we have traditions, right? Otherwise, we can't say we're really Chinese. Being Chinese isn't just about where you come from, it's about our cultural stuff, right? So, certain cultural things are part of who we are as a nation, so they're definitely traditions. They come from our history, they're old, but they still matter now. The old stuff that's lost its spark in the present, that's just ancient history, not tradition. We've got to be clear about the difference between the old things that still matter now and the old things that are just relics of the past. When it comes to an artist honing their skills, we say it happens within a tradition, when they get into a certain artistic tradition. This growth is different from just picking up habits. Habits are things we do without thinking, but traditions are a conscious and deliberate choice. So, when we immerse ourselves in an artistic tradition, we're consciously and by our own choice take on the vision that art has had throughout history. It's not just an automatic thing. It's only when folks can't grow as artists, just sticking to tradition, that they turn artistic tradition into a routine, instead of really understanding and accepting what makes it special. So, let's dive into the whole tradition and innovation thing. Tradition is like the old mojo that still lives on in the artist, and when they get all creative, that's when tradition brings out the new stuff. We gotta make sure we say both of these things. You see, artists can't just ignore tradition, it's like a part of them, it's that old school vibe that's still kicking. But how does tradition keep going in the here and now? It's all about the artist's innovation. That's how tradition keeps on bringing out the new goods. Once we've said both of these things, we get that tradition and innovation have this back and forth thing going on. They kinda need each other, you know?